Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Awakening in Health with Dennis. I have the pleasure of having a very interesting person with me this morning, a Monica Smit, who has had a very fascinating journey over the last 4 or 5 years. I've been following her work very closely, and she has become somewhat of a social media celebrity. But I wanted to go through her journey as to how she got to where she is now. So, Monica, welcome to the studio this morning, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you. And excuse me, to the listeners, I love Cairns. I love the area. I love the atmosphere. I've never been past Airlie Beach, so it's really nice to be here.
Excellent. Okay, you had a very interesting journey. From what I gather, you started out in real estate, and you did that for a number of years, and then you decided to do some very dramatic things. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I basically my job has always been in sales. So I've done sales for a radio station, actually, like selling ads and things like that. And when I was about 27, 28, I found myself doing real estate, but doing like house and land packages. So I had access to some good land deals, and I somehow magically just made some good decisions. And I ended up making a lot of money, not from selling houses, but from investing and flipping blocks and things like that. And so I was 28, 29, and I had a decision. I had a lot of money in the bank, and I was like, and I'd never had that money before. Never seen that sort of money before. And I was like, I had a choice. I was like, I could stay here in one place and really set myself up, like, buy investment properties and just, really set my future up. Or I could go and blow the money and travel and have experiences and grow and evolve as a human being and things like that. And so I decided to do the latter, which was sounds a lot more fun, of course. So when I was about 28, 29, I started traveling on my own. I started in Asia, so Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and then I did America, Canada, South America, not all of everything, of course, but it was in Thailand when I first started that 2-year trip that I picked up a camera and I started asking a tour guide questions about his life, about his wages, about his family. And then I just realized I liked it. And that's where my hobby journalism began. And then I visited orphanages and did, made them promo videos to help them with donations or fundraising or awareness and things like that. And I got to visit some really remote villages and look face to face in little girls' eyes that have been sex trafficked and things like that. And just being confronted with, to be honest, the worst parts of humanity, but also the best parts as well, seeing people trying to help. I met undercover people that would go into these, these underage nightclubs in Asia and things like that to catch these people in the act. And, I got to learn all that sort of stuff.
But what is an underage nightclub?
Well, it's where underage girls are sold for sex.
Gotcha. So is it like a general nightclub where everybody goes, but they have a section, or is it actually a building where that's just where you go to do that?
Well, I guess if you know, then you know. Gotcha. But also the underage girls would be in the back.
Okay.
They wouldn't be on
it wasn't
display.
Obvious. Yeah.
And then, of course, Asian women can look very young anyway, even if they're overage. But, I guess if you are a tourist, or actually, no, a lot of the locals also do go to these places too. It's not just Westerners, just so you know. But, you would go up and ask if there are underage girls in the back, if that's what you're interested in.
Sure. And I don't want to kind of take it, I guess, too much in that direction. Yeah. But what kind of ages are we talking about?
Oh, look, it's all ages, I think.
Really, like even prepubescent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, okay.
No, that's what. Yeah, definitely.
That's what you mean by underage.
Look, yeah. I mean, definitely any age under 18 would be considered underage.
Sure,
of course. Sure. And also where are they coming from, and were they stolen? Were they? There's all these questions. But the point is that that's when I really started to look outside my own life, my own situation, and realize that the world is not this pretty place that my parents brought me up in, and that's when I started asking a lot more questions. But my point was, I guess, that's where my hobby journalism started. And then when I was traveling Canada and America and things like that, I bought a van that had a bed in the back, like a minivan. Okay, so there's nothing fancy about it. You can imagine that it was pretty rough. But I drove 75,000 kilometers around Canada and America, And I kept asking people questions, whether it was on a hike in the Grand Canyon or just at the supermarket, or I would buy something off Facebook marketplace, and the guy was interesting. I was like, can I interview you? So I would just interview anyone that was willing to be interviewed. And I still have all those interviews on flash drives, and who knows, one day. And I also did droning as well. So I did a lot of drone footage all over national park. I mean, I've got some amazing stuff. But the point is that I believe those experiences is what built me to be the person that could handle what I was going to do in 2020. I didn't know that I was training for something, but I kind of did know that I was working on myself for a reason. And even though I did all this free work for people and I did lots of hours of editing, there was something inside of me that said, don't worry, this is all for something. And when you become an influencer or whatever, some people think that you just make one video and you go viral. It just doesn't happen like that. There was thousands and thousands of hours worth of videos that didn't go anywhere, and you think that this is the video that's going to get there, And just to create a bit more context as well, is that I went and documented a hurricane disaster zone in Florida, Hurricane Michael. I got to see what the weather did to that place, and I got to meet people who had to literally swim away from their house that had just blown up in the peripheral, and all these stories. Like one woman, her husband died during the hurricane, but because they were locked into that area, her husband's body was in the kitchen for 3 days because they couldn't get an ambulance there. Like, can you imagine? This woman's telling me the story. I have all of that stuff on flash drives, and so I wasn't just a make-believe journalist. I was actually doing that work. I also documented the opioid crisis in America. This was my first experience into the corruption of money versus health. It's not always about health. It's sometimes about money for some people. And the opioid crisis in America is still ongoing. I mean, there's that documentary Painkiller on Netflix that talks about it. And the fact that people can peddle a drug that might not work and actually cause problems just for money, that, again, like with the sex trafficking, started to open my eyes about what humans are capable of, because I was quite naive in my childhood. I really thought everyone was just nice like my family, and obviously they're not. So that was my experiences in America. Then I came home from all that. Yeah.
So just back to the opioid crisis, just for people who don't know too much about it, what stood out to you about that? And I guess what I'm referring is, you said people peddling. I'd be saying that it's really important. Absolutely, we're also talking. That's exactly where I'm going with that. And these people, 3 of them were doctors. So we're not talking about criminal. Well, I guess we are, but on the face of it, we're talking about a legitimate professional, or 3 legitimate professionals, doing something legitimate, which is just causing incredible chaos throughout America in the form of so-called legal opiates. It's actually a worse crisis than the illicit drug.
Oh my gosh! I mean, you think COVID was a problem? That's a joke compared to the lives that have been lost and the families that have been damaged by this. Do you know how many grandparents are bringing up their grandchildren because their children were overdosed?
And this is prescribed medication, by the way, isn't it? It is prescription medication that's legal. People have to be reading.
And it's still being sold, although there's a lot more information out there about it. But the Sackler families still haven't been persecuted. They were persecuted, and they were told they had to pay an obscene amount of money. They've still never paid it.
But also, it was a drop in the ocean compared to the profits that they're still making. But this is something that I'm sure your audience won't know, is that when the opioids came out from the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, I guess it was 1988 or somewhere around there, they obviously claimed, now it did get rid of pain, there's no doubt about it, but they claimed that it was only 1% addictive, and that was based on a fraudulent data set anyway. So anyway, but what they also did at the exact same time is they brought in an incentive program for doctors, GPs, normal doctors, that there was 5 questions, I believe, and one of the questions was to the patient when they leave, what is your level of pain? How are you feeling? Now, based on these 5 questions, doctors would get bonuses at the end of the year.
And obviously, if a patient walks out with pain, that's not a bonus situation there. That's a bad situation there. So you would want your patient to walk out of that room with less pain than they walked in. So they would actually give them the medication straight away on the spot, and it's very fast acting, right? So even good-willed doctors who didn't want to be prescribing addictive opioids or things like that, they just thought, well, I want to take the pain away. So they were innocently, a lot of doctors would just prescribe it thinking that they believed the data. And of course they did. And what was most surprising as well is that there was obviously this 10 or 15 year period where there was no information about how addictive it was. And they kept getting gaslit, these families who say, my son got into a car accident, he's got 3 kids, and now he's addicted to these opioids and there's no help for him. You know why there's no help? Is because he's a normal, middle-aged, white-collar, white guy who isn't a drug addict but has become an addict. And there is no help for you because you don't fit the criteria of a street drug addict that needs that sort of help.
But more than that, if he were to fit the criteria of addict, there would be a link between him and the medication he took, which would also cast a negative light on it. So these studies are deliberately twisted to take the focus off the poison and the evil and the harms that these drugs are doing.
Well, they would actually gaslight the users and say that, well, you're an addict, so it's your fault, you know. But the thing is, if you're a drug addict and you have to go out on the streets to find cocaine and things like that, it takes a lot more effort than if you were to go to the doctor and get a prescription legally. So it's not the same thing. They created addicts out of people that never would have been addicts. Now, there were some towns in America that had more prescriptions for opioids than people, right? And people used to have opioid parties and they'd put their grandparents' pills into a bowl and just take whatever the lucky draw was. And, this sort of stuff was going on in America and still is. And obviously it was really shocking for me. And I got to go in ambulances and see these overdoses myself. I was in hospitals, and this was all because I decided to be a hobby journalist. So I got to learn all of this stuff. And, this doctor said to me once, I said, what is so addictive about fentanyl is another thing, but why are people so addicted to this stuff? And he said, Monica, it is the highest you can possibly be before dying. That's the highest you could possibly be. And fentanyl is now this is a slightly different topic, but it's all around this, is that fentanyl is being laced into cocaine and into marijuana even. And so people, imagine that you haven't had cocaine since you were 18 years old or back in your heyday, and you're now 45 years old and you and your husband are going to a wedding and you think, oh, we'll just do some cocaine. Now, I'm not an advocate for cocaine, but I'm just saying it's kind of an innocent scenario in that sense. And the cocaine's laced with fentanyl and they both die. Fentanyl is also made in China and shipped to America. Now, China really wants to, of course, ruin the West, don't they? Right? I know we're going into a lot of different topics here, but it is to get America addicted to opioids, to get them addicted to fentanyl, to break down the family unit is all a great way to wage war in a sense. Anyway, so
and again, the British colonies did that to China.
Yeah,
a couple of hundred years ago with the opium. The opium. So I mean, this is actually a very geological pattern that's repeating. Yeah. So there's nothing new about this, is there?
No, that's true. Anyway, so I've gone down a few rabbit holes, but my point is that I started doing hobby journalism and I started to open my eyes to the world and things like that. I had no idea that it was preparing me for something. I did have a feeling that I wanted to have a voice for something, so I kept doing these videos, I kept writing things, I wrote blogs, I just was leaving myself open to purpose and to a path. That's when I came home. It was early November 2019, so about 4 months before, the bats made COVID.
So you're back in Melbourne. You've had this incredible adventure. You're really inspired. You're kind of I think you were editing a documentary at the time.
Yeah.
And your focus is on, I guess, this helping the world a little bit, and just putting your energy towards telling people a little bit more truth about what's really going on in the world. Mm. And all of a sudden you're sitting back and either through, I don't know, YouTube or the television or whatever, you see these people dropping in the streets in China, and this story, I guess, is coming out that one of the most deadliest events in humanity is hitting, and everybody is about to die. And you are in Melbourne at the time, I gather. What were your first thoughts?
Yeah, so I probably, like most people, just thought it was a story and it would go away, right? Like, okay, China's problem, no big deal. And then all of a sudden it became everyone's problem. And I thought maybe it is a really bad virus, but I was never personally afraid because generally speaking, I'm pretty healthy. I'm not old. I don't have immune problems. My mum brought us up on really good food and alternative medicine. And I just trust my immune system, and if it's my time kind of thing. I'm just not really afraid of that sort of thing. But I didn't think it would become what it became, and I didn't think everyone else would be so scared of it. And of course, in Melbourne, we got locked down really quite straight away. And 2 weeks to flatten the curve, I would have been fine with, And if the restrictions or if the reaction was comparable to the risk, then I would have been fine with it. Also, if everyone was actually dropping dead around me, I would have stayed home too, But what happened is that it just didn't make sense. Keeping your immune system healthy and protecting yourself from viruses is really important, but all the restrictions were basically doing the opposite from just a really common sense health perspective. Being locked in your house, not exercising, and spending all that time in front of screens and not going to school and not having contact with other, germs and things like that, which are good for you, but just mentally as well. When you're mentally drawn down, you're obviously immune compromised as well. So to me, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse like you were. I know nothing about health from an evidence data perspective, but you don't need to be an expert to know that being stuck in your home is not going to help you.
And that's one of the things they did beautifully over the last few years. And it's kind of started, I think, really kind of more forcefully probably from the last 30, 40 years, is this logical fallacy, the appeal to authority fallacy. And if you are not painted as an expert, you can't talk about it. They're doing it with climate change. They're doing it with health. But you're really saying that common sense should be prevailing here. You can't expect to be healthy if you're sitting in front of a screen stuck in your house with something covering your face. And fear. That's exactly right. And again, I can talk about that from a very different perspective, which is the research that shows that these measures there's absolutely zero research to support any of these measures, which is another story which I don't really want to get into now. So within a few months, you're starting to seriously question the strategies that the government in Melbourne is implementing, and you've already had that, I guess, increased suspicion that the powers that be, especially in medicine, in relation to the opioid crisis specifically in America, they're not necessarily working in our best interests. Would that be right?
Yeah.
So at some stage, something clicked where you thought, hang on, enough is enough. How did that come about?
Yeah, and can I just say, the journey of starting to question everything is a difficult one. When I saw the sex trafficking in Thailand, and I started watching some documentaries, and when I saw parents whose children had overdosed and who left behind children, or husbands who have overdosed and things like that, it's not easy. It's really hard. And I spent many nights crying over these things, crying for people that I couldn't see and stuff like that. But that's the beginning of your journey. And I think you have to go through that to then come out the other side and then be able to look at things and say, okay, yep, I know that there's evil in the world, but what can I do about it? But you've got to go through those emotions. And I think waking up to, propaganda and I guess you could say people having wanting to do bad and stuff like that, it is hard, but it gets better. So I just wanted to say that. But yeah, your question was
something would have triggered you to. Obviously, the suspicion would have been growing slowly, maturely, because things weren't making sense.
Yes.
And then something would have just made you go, hang on a second.
Yeah.
What was that?
So it was July. Now I was working closely with and almost dating this guy called Morgan Jonas. And we ended up dating. He had a protest planned against the Belt and Road Initiative, which was, Daniel Andrews, the Premier of Victoria, was trying to make a deal directly with China to build infrastructure, and a state of Australia can't make a deal with a foreign country for just one state. It just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, I won't go into that. But he had a protest planned before the lockdowns. And then when the lockdowns happened, he kept delaying the protest because, we thought we would do it. Like, we were all up in the air. We didn't know what was going on, so he was actually respecting the rules and things like that. And so was I, mostly. And he kept delaying it. And then it was the end of July and maybe August. And he said, he had a police liaison. And he said to the police liaison, look, I won't have the protest, but let me go to Parliament with one camera person and a megaphone. That's it. I'll just say my piece and then the protest will be cancelled and it will be finished with. Now, there's no health risk with that because there was no one on the streets. It was lockdown. It was winter. It would have just been me and him. We were already hanging out anyway, so there's no health risk. And the police said, no, you can't do that. That was when it hit me. And I was like, whoa, holy moly. This is not about health. This is about squashing dissent. They didn't want a protest against Daniel Andrews, even if no one was at a health risk. That's when I jumped into action.
That's very interesting. I mean, I see the whole situation in a very similar manner, I think. But it's very, very hard for people just to jump across to the belief system, I guess, or the recognition that these are very tyrannical moves, aren't they? You can't compromise freedom. You can't compromise truth. You can't compromise free speech. Even if people like you or me were wrong and there was some serious virus, we have to have the other side of that narrative being floated. It's necessary to be able to get an informed opinion. So all of a sudden, anybody who's speaking out in the negative is suddenly being painted in a really serious light. So you're trying to, I guess, bang the drum about, hey, some of these things that are happening in Melbourne, lockdowns and whatnot, this is not good. We need to be doing something about this. This is something that's greater than health. What evolved after that?
Well, I wanted, at this point, respected members of Parliament, respected police, respected authority. I was brought up that way. And I thought maybe the members of Parliament don't know what's going on. Maybe they don't know what people are thinking.
But just from memory again, prior to this whole event, you actually were seriously involved, just to give you some more context, you were seriously involved in a really despicable situation where the government were culling Brumbies, which are wild horses for anybody listening outside of Australia. And the way that happens is really, really horrible, that they are left to die and suffer with these gunshot wounds from helicopters. So you started trying to highlight the plight of these animals, and there's way worse things going on, like mining or wild pigs or whatnot, than shooting these beautiful horses who are not really doing too much damage. So you had started to get connections within parliamentary systems, didn't you?
I had gotten my toes wet within the hobby journalism political sphere of Victoria before COVID happened. And so I was starting to learn about the political structures, not just from high school, but actually learning how these things work. I didn't know anything about politics, or I didn't even know who the Prime Minister was at that point. I didn't care, until it started affecting me. Like most people, I think. I don't think people have ever been so attuned to politics as they are now, because they realise the effect it has. So yes, I had started that process. And then after that experience with that protest, I was like, well, how are we going? We couldn't protest because it was illegal, obviously. We couldn't gather, we couldn't leave our house. I felt this feeling that people were oppressed and depressed because they were stuck in their home in winter in Victoria, which is not like Cairns winter, okay? Stuck at home, all the kids are at home, and were not even allowed to vent those emotions in a healthy way by using freedom of speech and choice and things like that. So I was like, okay, what can we do? So I came up with this idea for a live stream protest, which does help get rid of the emotions. It helps to collect people's thoughts, but no one's going to get arrested or in trouble and blah, blah, blah. So I promised the audience that I would collate all the comments that they were writing into like a pie graph or a diagram of some sort and send it to all the members of Parliament so that they understood what a huge portion of people were thinking. And I thought I was doing a service for these members of Parliament. I had nothing against them at that time. I thought they were as confused as we were, so I thought, great. Anyway, that live stream protest went bonkers, and it had 4,500 comments, and I was like, oh my gosh, what have I just committed to? I can't go through all these comments. somehow volunteers came out of nowhere and helped me. But yeah, so within about a week, I had sent a mass email to all the members of Parliament in Victoria. And I felt pretty good about that. Here you go, here's some data. And of course, they didn't care at all. And so I really just spent the next 2 years banging my head against a wall trying to explain to them that people aren't happy and that they want something different. And at least they want some explanation or some justification. Like, why would you shut a kid's playground in summer when it's outdoors and the kids aren't really in danger of dying from COVID and they can't go to school? Like, oh my gosh.
They turned the taps off on the beaches up here. You couldn't wash sand off your feet because of contagion. They turned the water off. Well, I mean, the logic, I joke about this, it doesn't get you if you're sitting down, but it can get you if you're standing up, and groups of 3 but not 4, groups of 7 but not 8, or, clapping is allowed, no singing. I mean, what?
You gotta laugh.
It's
really.
A farce, absolutely. So, okay,
wasn't funny then, though.
It's not at all. And again, most people would expect that the government structures are working for us. They are interested in what we've got to say, and I kind of empathise with that idea that you think, okay, I'm going to collate all this information. People are looking at this, and I guess you were a bit excited to bring it in, and you thought you might make changes, and you'd have these politicians being really stunned and surprised and grateful for your
service.
For your service.
Yeah.
That didn't happen, right?
No.
What happened?
I guess I got ignored by the vast majority of them.
Mm-hmm.
They obviously knew straight away that, there's this new voice in town. They definitely that. But the friendly politicians did obviously get in touch with me, and I did make some connections with with some good politicians, which led me, which we were able to have a relationship moving forward. But what it did is it kind of catapulted me into this space where I became, I guess, a face of anti-lockdown. But I'm not anti-lockdown. I'm anti-lockdown if it doesn't make sense. If it made sense, I would not be against it at all. And like I think I already said, I would stay home if that was safe for me too. But I respect someone's right to put themselves at risk if they want to. So if I felt really scared of COVID, then I would have the right to stay home, order my groceries online, wear a mask inside alone if I want to, wear a mask outside alone if I want to in the car. Totally respect anyone's right to do that. But I also believe that people who were that scared and stayed home should respect other people's right to put themselves at risk if that's the case. And you really should be able to control your own situation. But I guess the clever narrative that they created was that you putting yourself at risk is putting everyone else at risk, which was not you'll kill Granny, which, if Granny was really scared, she wouldn't see you anyway. So
and we've never had a situation where the majority have had to compromise their health to protect the weak.
No.
And this is insanity when we think about whole populations. What we'll do is we'll take a quick break for music now, and then we'll come back. But after the break, I'm talking to Monica Smit, who became, I guess, an anti-hero as far as the mainstream would be concerned, but a very, very significant public figure in relation to fighting against the tyranny that happened down in Melbourne. And after the break, we are going to talk about how Monica ended up in prison. Welcome back to Awakening in Health this morning, and I have the lovely Miss Monica Smit with me, and we are talking about her journey of becoming an activist in Melbourne during the lockdown trials that were down there. We've just covered how she got towards, I guess, having a certain degree of fame on social media, but her decisions led her to being imprisoned. Monica, can you take us through that journey of how that happened?
Sure. So when I started Reignite Democracy Australia, I guess I did a few key things that got me some notoriety within the mainstream media, whether negative or positive. It was getting me publicity for my opinions about the government overreach during COVID, basically. Like I said, in the Health Act, the government does have the right to restrict some personal freedoms if it's reasonably necessary. But what I found is that there was never any evidence to prove reasonably necessary, and in fact, there never has been. So kind of in a way, we've been vindicated for some of the stances that we had. But anyway, of course, I was a journalist at the time, but I was also growing this organisation called Recounts Australia. We had groups all over the country, and of course, we were heavily involved in protests and things like that. We didn't plan them, but we promoted them and helped them. And pretty much, I had 8 staff. I had lots of support from the people, and I had a big email subscription list, over 100,000, and lots of people on social media. So I guess I became a voice against the government at the time. I'm not against the government. I'm just against the government if they're doing the wrong thing. So that's when I guess they decided that they wanted to find a way to silence me, I guess. And so I was finding loopholes around the rules, around the restrictions, in a clever and cheeky way, not because I wanted to be a rebel, but just because I wanted people to voice their concerns and have freedom of speech, even during the pandemic. And but I stopped playing the game, and I just started promoting protests. And like a few days later, I got arrested for incitement, which is basically, if I convince you, Dennis, to do an armed robbery and you get caught, I would be charged to do it as part of coercing and things like that. But in this case, it's interesting because breaking COVID restrictions was only a finable offence. It's not a criminal offence. So actually what incitement is in this instance, the example I use is that if we go for a drive and I convince you to park in a no parking zone and you get a parking ticket and I get charged with incitement for encouraging you to park there, that's kind of how ridiculous it is. But the police are entitled to finding loopholes too, I guess. And they found a loophole in their system to shut people like me up. And what they were doing is they would charge you with incitement even if they might not have even had enough to take you to trial. They'll give you bail conditions that restrict your freedom of speech. And that's what happened to me. The two bail conditions that I couldn't sign was that they wanted me to delete everything off my website that was in opposition to the COVID restrictions. Not anything on my website that was encouraging people to break COVID restrictions. No. Anything that was simply in opposition to the COVID restrictions. Now, my website was getting up to 100,000 views a week. I had 8 staff, paid staff. So I would have had to delete probably my entire website because most of my content was in opposition to the lockdowns and the COVID restrictions. They would have all lost their jobs. The email subscription base would have been null and void, and it would have been a really big blow for people who were following me. Now, the reason I say that the website was getting 100,000 views a week is not to gloat, but to explain that obviously it was a service that the people needed. If it wasn't a service that they needed, they wouldn't have been looking. So I could not take that away from the people, basically.
And an important point I want to just chip in briefly is that the media, the mainstream media, really let us down. And an example, I heard you talk last night, but an example of that was the protests in Melbourne, where we, in Cairns, for example, were looking at 10 to 15,000 people marching. I know friends down there, and if it wasn't in the hundreds of thousands, these marches were just huge. Absolutely huge. So the mainstream media, their reporting was I would say, this is subjective obviously, was blatant lying about what was going on down there. And that point you just made there about the views and the hits of your website verifies the fact that enough people realized that things are not right. They're not getting told the truth. So yeah, just sorry to cut across you.
No, they were searching for something they could believe in or whatever, for a voice or something like that. So that's why, yeah. And so obviously they didn't expect me to not sign the bail conditions, but I didn't sign them. And that's why I went to prison for 22 days in isolation because I wouldn't get a PCR test. And we appealed the bail conditions, the ones that were draconian or communistic, I would say, and they all got taken away. So we won that, and we won that appeal. And so I got out with very minimal bail conditions, and a few more things happened after that, but they dropped the charges as I had suspected. And of course I'll be going after them because you can't just put an innocent woman like me in prison for 22 days and not have any recourse.
And they also wanted to, from memory, hack your phone, actually for you to give up your login information for all your devices, which is absolutely friggin' terrifying. Well, it's actually, I find just terrifying. There's your banking, there's your information related
Google
to other
Maps.
people. There's every single thing. I mean, this is This is
everything.
this is Stasi type stuff, isn't it?
Look, it was a threat because they wanted me to. So basically, they got a warrant out to force me to give them password access to everything on my phone that they wanted. All the administrative accounts with Reignite Democracy Australia, all my staff emails, all the emails coming in, the databases, my 100,000 databases, all the website data, everything. And I had three choices. Was I could plead guilty to the original charge of incitement and then the warrant would go away. I could give them the data, or I could not give them the data and risk going back to prison for 3 months for breaching bail because it's another criminal offence. And mind you, it's a whole new trial, a whole new offence. In fact, it's worse than the incitement charge, not complying to this warrant. So I gave it a go and I said no, and 2 days later they dropped the charges. So what that means to me is that they wanted that data, or they wanted me to plead guilty, or they wanted to just threaten me and yeah.
What a dangerous precedent that sets, though. For if you had not said no, if you'd accepted that, for them to just go through absolutely everything.
Oh,
I remember I used to live in London in the early 90s, and there was a massive backlash because of there was a ruling that was saying that we had to have pictures on our driver's license. And so many people were going, this is a breach of our privacy. No way, we're not going to accept this, blah, blah, blah. And at the time, I was thinking, what's the harm? And there's something they call a slippery slope fallacy, where you can kind of say, well, if this happens, then down the line, this could happen, this could happen. But again, now I think back, and those wiser people, I was in my early 20s back then, I was probably a teenager, and those people who were furious at that driver's license, the pictures on driver's license, I'll tell you what, they were bloody right. Now you look at what's happening in London with the ULEZ cameras and the tracking and tracing of everything. It's people use the word Orwellian, and it's we're living in it now.
So we have to push back against it, which is the point. And even in the privacy of your own situation, your own work, you do need to push back against it. I mean, obviously my pushback is public, but it just goes to show that people are pushing back in many different ways. And yes, I did win that case, They tried to silence me. It didn't work. They tried to push harder. It didn't work. But only because, and I said this last night, of course, you heard that, but I'm in the right, just so that the listeners know, I'm not a special person necessarily. I don't have children. I have a very supportive family, and I had savings, so I wasn't going to lose a job. I was the right person to see these empty threats face on and to call their bluff. Not everyone is in that position, and not everyone should. If you have children, you shouldn't risk going to prison for 22 days and freaking out your entire family, for example. That's not your role. It's my role, and I'll keep doing it while I can. But yes, so they dropped the charges. But I had to spend 22 days in prison, which isn't really something that you want to do. It's a good story though. If you're around a dinner table and someone's like, "What's the craziest story you've got?" I went to prison. It's a pretty good one. There were some really good things that came out of that, which is that this story is good because it does show what they're willing to go to shut people up, especially. And I'm a law-abiding citizen, Dennis. I've always paid my taxes. I've contributed to this country. I was born here, bred here, and I love this country. And the fact that they were willing to put someone as innocent as me into prison, it's crazy.
So basically, you had these charges for incitement, and then the magistrates and the hierarchy, even when you challenged, essentially just put these conditions called bail conditions on you that absolutely would have I guess destroyed your freedom, every part of it. And you basically saying, now hang on a second, this is actually unfair. You're taking all my liberty and all my freedom away. They went, well, sorry, we can do whatever the hell you want, and if you don't agree, we're going to stick you in prison for 20 days. Is that, am I missing something?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
That's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And the reason I always like to kind of summarize that is because we can't leave these points understated. Because essentially that can happen to anybody else.
Yeah.
Don't just think, like, as you said, you're I mean, like, who's normal, I guess, for a start. But it's not like you're just this way out there kind of weird person. You're the person next door. You're somebody's niece. You're somebody's daughter. Mm-hmm. You're somebody's aunt. In the same way that I'm relatively normal. Again, I use that kind of loosely. But we're not these crazy bloody criminal masterminds wanting to destroy society. And that point is that unless more people stand up, more innocent people are going to be getting thrown around by authority.
And it sounds like, I guess some people might say conspiratorial or conspiracy theorists to say that the government's trying to control us all and stuff like that. And look, and a lot of people say, well, I've got nothing to hide, so I don't really mind facial recognition and all this and that. And I understand where you're coming from. And, 5 years ago, I didn't even have a password on my phone, and all my passwords were the same. All of them were the same. And now I've been forced into becoming a person that I never was, which is a bit paranoid. I have a big long passwords for everything now, and that I have to remember it in my head because I don't want to write it anywhere. I have a long password on my phone. It's not actually the person I want to be. I actually don't like this.
But you ended up in prison. You ended up in prison literally. What other, I guess, flag would you want waved in front of your face to say that, I don't think it's crazy.
It doesn't get much worse than that. Yeah. And if I didn't have a password on my phone, then they would have gotten into everything.
Absolutely. And other people's privacy and liberty would have been taken. People,
absolutely. And, it's the point, I guess you could look at me and say, well, that was just one person who lost their freedom of speech, and maybe right now the listener listening, maybe you agree with the whole narrative of everything the mainstream media says, and good for you, right? But what if one day you don't agree with the mainstream narrative? You will become me, okay? It's really that simple. Like, these wind farms, for example, if you all of a sudden decide that you're anti-wind farms because, well, to be honest, you should be, that's anti-mainstream narrative. And maybe you agreed with all COVID, you've had all 5 jabs, for example, but you don't agree on this topic, and you get put in prison like I did. And
because you didn't agree because you're a dissident.
So just because you agree now doesn't mean you always will, and even if you disagree with everything I stand for, you should at least respect my stance in standing up for what I believe in. If you believe that the sky is green and you want to protest about it, I respect your right to do that. I will never stop your right to protest or to voice yourself, and I would never want to see you in prison for your beliefs. I respect all of those beliefs unless they hurt someone else, of course. But so the point is we even if we disagree, we need to have that camaraderie and that unity within Australia to say that I respect your right to disagree with me, and I'm not going to hate you for it just because you disagree with me. I really wish that people could see that I at least genuinely thought I was doing the right thing. Now, looking back, we've been vindicated on many topics, but I really believed I was helping other people because I didn't want to see kids at home stuck at home. I didn't want to see people going to weddings with 2 people at the church.
Funerals nursing homes, parents dying, intensive care, not allowed to sit in front of hugging people with plastic suits on. It's
just insane. And I just couldn't watch that and be silent. And surely people can see some goodness in that, even if you don't agree with the way I went about it, And if we, online is a real problem because people can say whatever they want online without any repercussions. But I'm telling you, if you met me face to face, and I have met reporters who have written terrible things about me face to face.
I've seen some of them on mainstream,
but after I spend 5 minutes with them face to face, their reporting changes on me because we've had that energy exchange, and they realize they can look into your eyes and they can tell that you're actually not a bad person and you're doing it for the right reasons, at least. It's all about intention, right? Genuine intention. And so if we can get away from the websites, get away from the internet and actually talk to people on the streets, you'd be surprised. I can have a conversation with someone that loved the lockdowns and hated the protests and something like that, and we can still end on a good note because we've got that human interaction and that we know that humans are generally pretty good people. So I think we should believe in each other. And next time there's a huge catastrophe that people take sides on in Australia, I just hope that we have a bit more empathy for each other's positions.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what we'll do is, because we've got a good bit to talk about, but we might wrap up the radio part of the show now. And if you could just tell people a little bit about where they can get in touch with you or what projects. I believe you got a book out at the moment as well.
Yeah, sure.
And then what we'll do is we'll jump and continue the conversation on my mainstream media.
Yeah, on your media. Yeah, sure. So monicasmit.com is really where I have everything. I'm actually touring Australia at the moment. I'm touring Queensland. I have about 7 events in the next 7 days. So no rest for someone on a mission like me, but that's what I'm doing. I have my book, which is called Cell 22 because I was in Cell 22 for 22 days and I got released on the 22nd, and the courtroom was courtroom 22, so I thought I'd just go with the 22 thing. It means something as well. But anyway, and I still have a few campaigns. I talk a lot about using cash. I think it's really important that we use as much cash as we can because it takes profits away from the big banks and back into the local economy and things like that. And obviously you can't be tracked or traced or anything like that, and it's private. So I talk about that a lot. And yeah, so monicasmit.com, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Telegram, all that sort of stuff.
And I had the pleasure of having the people responsible for the cashless movement in Cairns on my show, and that's a great story. It just shows the power of how a couple of people, 2 or 3 people, can really make monumental things happen. And Frankie, if you're listening out there, you know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
She just did such a good job in making people, accountable, I guess. And now it's had repercussions around Australia.
That was amazing because, to be honest, a lot of our campaigns were not successful. That was one of the first campaigns that was successful, so it was really inspiring for the whole country. And
there's another kind of regular person I got on, Dr. Karen Ben, which is quite incredible, especially around the climate side of things. But she looked into the some of the legislation that's changed since the cashless, and from what she tells me, every single mayor and every single CEO from Australia had a meeting. I can't remember whether it was in Canberra or Melbourne. I think Canberra. And now the criteria for attending councils has been changed dramatically because of us. So we had 300 people out in council chambers, keeping them accountable. Now there's a maximum, I think, of something like 20. There's security involved. Everybody has to apply beforehand. They have to be vetted. They've got to wear badges, all because of our demonstration up here.
Are you serious?
I'm very serious, yeah.
You're telling me that residents of a council cannot go to their own council meeting?
That's what Dr. Ben has been telling me, and I want to just open that a little bit more with her. But I'm just
is it live streamed?
It's secondhand information at the moment.
Are the council meetings live streamed?
You can access them, but apparently all these crazy people in Cairns who are most of them are over the age of 60 and all law-abiding workers and grandparents and whatnot were too terrifying for this could happen again in other places. So the point
that's another topic, but yeah,
that is another topic, absolutely. But the point I'm making is that these are the links that these people are going to not be accountable for decisions that have really detrimental effects on society. Listen, with that, Monica, thank you so much for being on the radio part of the segment. And anybody listening, you can find part 2 on Awakening in Health with Dennis. Thank you so much, Monica.
Thanks.